I stood at the window of my new office, the one that still smelled faintly of my father's cologne, cedarwood and a hint of leather. The Seattle skyline stretched out before me, a jagged silhouette of steel and glass, softened by the gray haze of early March. Rain streaked the panes, a constant drizzle that tapped against the silence like a nervous heartbeat. Carter Tech Solutions was mine now, handed to me in a will I hadn't expected to read so soon. 32 years old, and I'd inherited a company I wasn't sure I deserved. The office was on the 12th floor of a sleek downtown tower, all modern edges and minimalist decor. My father, James Carter, had built this place from nothing, a tech solutions firm that thrived on his charisma and grit. The desk behind me was a slab of polished oak, cluttered with his things. A chipped coffee mug with "World's Okayest Boss" scrawled on it, a stack of yellowed notepads, a photo of us fishing at Lake Washington when I was 10. I hadn't touched any of it yet. Moving his stuff felt like erasing him. I pressed my forehead against the cool glass, watching the city blur through the rain. Guilt gnawed at me, sharp and relentless. I hadn't been there when he needed me most. The heart attack had come fast, too fast. One minute he was emailing me about a client pitch, the next he was gone. I'd been across town, stuck in a meeting with a vendor, ignoring his call because I thought it could wait. It couldn't. Now, every corner of this office reminded me of what I'd failed to do. Help him, save him, be the son he'd raised me to be. The phone on the desk buzzed, pulling me from my spiral. I glanced at it. Lydia, my assistant. She'd worked for Dad, too. A steady presence with sharp eyes and a knack for keeping things running. I picked up the receiver, my voice rougher than I intended. Yeah, Nathan, Derek's here. Says he needs to talk to you. Now. Her tone was clipped, the way it got when she was annoyed but too professional to show it outright. I sighed. Derek Mason, our lead project manager. Cocky, ambitious, and lately, a little too comfortable pushing boundaries. Send him in. The door swung open a moment later, and Derek strode in like he owned the place. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a tailored suit that screamed money and a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Nathan, he said, dropping into the chair across from me, without an invitation. Congrats on the big chair. Shame about James, though. Real tragedy. I clenched my jaw, nodding curtly. Thanks. What's this about? He leaned back, crossing one leg over the other, his polished shoe catching the light. Straight to business, huh? All right. I've been thinking. With everything changing around here, it's time we renegotiate my deal. I'm pulling more weight than ever. Client meetings, late nights, you name it. I deserve a raise. I stared at him, the audacity sinking in. My father wasn't even cold in the ground, and here was Derek, angling for a payday. We're still sorting out the transition, I said, keeping my voice even. This isn't the time. His grin faltered, just for a second, before snapping back into place. Come on, man. You're the boss now. Make a call. I'm worth it, ask anyone. There was something in his tone, a sharpness that set my teeth on edge. I'd known Derek for years. Dad had hired him fresh out of grad school, groomed him into a star. But lately, I'd caught whispers. Late arrivals, vague expense reports, a side hustle he thought no one noticed. I didn't have proof, not yet, but the unease was there, coiling in my gut like a warning. I'll think about it, I said, standing to signal the end of the conversation. We've got bigger priorities right now. He didn't move right away, just watched me with those cold, calculating eyes. Then he stood, smoothing his jacket. Sure thing, boss. Don't take too long, though. I'd hate to have to explore other options. The door clicked shut behind him, and the room felt smaller, the air heavier. I sank into the chair, Dad's chair, and rubbed my temples. Outside, the rain picked up, drumming harder against the glass. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, something I couldn't see yet. Derek's words lingered, not just a request but a threat, subtle and slick. My gaze drifted to the photo on the desk, Dad's arm around my shoulders, the sun glinting off the lake. I'd always thought I'd have more time, to prove myself, to make him proud. Now I was here alone, with a company to run and a shadow creeping closer than I could name. The phone buzzed again. I ignored it, staring out at the city as the rain turned the world to static. Whatever Derek was playing at, I'd figure it out. I had to. For Dad. For me. The rain didn't let up that afternoon. It hammered against the windows of Carter Tech Solutions, a relentless rhythm that mirrored the pounding in my chest. I'd barely had time to process Derek's veiled threat when the office settled into its usual hum. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the faint murmur of voices drifting through the walls. I told myself to focus, to push his words aside. There were budgets to review, emails piling up, a company to keep afloat. But that shadow lingered, tugging at the edges of my thoughts. I was halfway through a client proposal when the lights flickered. Just a quick stutter, barely noticeable, but it made me pause. I glanced up, frowning. The fluorescents buzzed faintly overhead, then steadied. A fluke, I figured, old wiring in a storm. Seattle buildings were full of quirks like that. I shook it off and turned back to my screen, the blue glow casting sharp shadows across Dad's desk. Then it happened again. This time, the flicker lasted longer, a full second of darkness before the lights snapped back on. My pulse quickened. I stood, crossing to the window. The city outside was a smear of wet gray, the streetlights below winking like they were struggling to stay awake. Something felt wrong, a prickle along my spine I couldn't name. "Lydia," I called, stepping toward the door. My voice sounded too loud in the quiet. No answer. I pushed the door open and peered into the hall. Empty. The usual bustle of the office had gone still, the air thick with an unnatural hush. My shoes clicked against the hard wood as I moved toward her desk, the sound sharp and solitary. Her chair was empty, her computer screen dark. A half-finished cup of tea sat beside her keyboard, steam still curling faintly from the surface. She couldn't have been gone long. "Lydia." I tried again, louder this time. Nothing. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. I turned back toward my office, and that's when I saw it, a faint red glow pulsing under the door to the server room down the hall. My stomach dropped. That wasn't normal. The server room was Dad's pride, a fortress of humming machines and blinking lights that kept Carter Tech running. It was always locked, always monitored. No one went in without clearance. Not even me, not yet. I took a step closer, my breath catching as the glow pulsed again, steady and deliberate, like a heartbeat. The air smelled faintly of ozone, sharp and electric. My hand hovered over the doorknob, cold metal biting into my palm. I didn't have the key. Lydia did, or maybe Derek. But something told me I couldn't wait. I twisted the knob anyway. Locked as expected. I banged on the door, the sound echoing down the empty hall. "Hey, anyone in there?" My voice cracked, betraying the fear creeping up my throat. No response, just that eerie red light seeping through the crack at the bottom, staining the floor like blood. I stumbled back to Lydia's desk, fumbling through her drawers. Pens, sticky notes, a pack of gum, nothing useful. Then my fingers brushed something hard and metallic, taped under the drawer's edge. A key. I yanked it free, my hands trembling as I raced back to the server room. The lock clicked open, and I shoved the door wide. The air inside was warm, thick with the hum of machinery. But the sound was wrong, too loud, too erratic, like a dozen engines misfiring at once. The red glow came from a panel on the far wall, a mess of wires and blinking lights I didn't understand. Smoke curled from one of the servers, thin and acrid, stinging my eyes. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. This wasn't a glitch. Someone had been here, done this. Sabotage. The word hit me like a punch, sharp and dizzying. I spun around, half expecting to see Derek lurking in the shadows, that smug grin plastered on his face. But the room was empty, just me and the machine spiraling out of control. I didn't know enough about the servers to fix this. Dad had always handled the tech side, or delegated it to people he trusted. People like Derek. My mind raced, piecing it together. His demand for a raise, the threat to explore other options. Had he done this as leverage? Or worse, revenge? I grabbed my phone, dialing Lydia first. Straight to voicemail. Then Ethan, our IT guy. Same thing. Panic clawed at me, raw and jagged. I was alone in this, and the company, Dad's legacy, was teetering on the edge of ruin. The smoke thickened, a gray haze filling the room. I coughed, backing toward the door as the red light pulsed faster, angrier. A sharp beep cut through the noise, then another, building into a shrill alarm that drilled into my skull. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it was bad, catastrophic, maybe. I bolted back to my office, slamming the door behind me. My hand shook as I rifled through Dad's desk, searching for anything. A manual, a contact list, something to tell me how to stop this. Papers scattered to the floor, the photo of us at the lake, tumbling with them. I stopped, staring at it, my chest tight. "I'm sorry, Dad," I whispered. "I don't know what to do." The alarm grew louder, spilling into the hall. I sank into the chair, my mind spinning. Derek's threat echoed in my head, twisting with the guilt I'd carried since Dad's death. Had I missed the signs? Was this my fault too? A shadow moved past the window. Not outside, but in the reflection. I whipped around, but the office was empty. My breath hitched, fear sinking deeper. Someone was here, watching, waiting. The lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness. When they snapped back on, a single word glowed on my computer screen, stark against the black: run. The word run stared back at me from the screen, stark and unblinking, as if it had a pulse of its own. My office felt like a trap closing in. The walls too tight, the air too thin. The alarm from the server room screeched through the walls, a relentless wail that made my teeth ache. I couldn't stay here, but I couldn't leave either, not without answers. Dad's company was crumbling, and I was the only one left to hold it together. I grabbed my phone again, my thumb hovering over Ethan's number. He was the IT guy, the one who'd know what that red glow and smoking server meant. No answer still. I tried Lydia once more, voicemail. My chest tightened, a cold sweat prickling along my neck. Where was everyone? The office had been alive an hour ago, a hive of voices and movement. Now it was a ghost town, and I was stranded in the middle of it. I forced myself to move, snatching the key I'd found under Lydia's drawer and shoving it into my pocket. My shoes squeaked against the hard wood as I stepped into the hall, the sound swallowed by the alarm's piercing cry. The lights flickered again, casting jagged shadows that danced along the walls. Every corner felt alive, watching me, waiting for me to slip. I headed for the stairwell. Elevators were too risky, with the power acting up. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing into the dim shaft. The air inside was damp and cool, smelling faintly of rust and concrete. I gripped the railing, my palms slick, and started down. My office was on 12, but I didn't know where I was going. Just away from that word. That warning burned into my screen. Halfway down, I stopped. Footsteps. Faint at first, then sharper, coming from below. My breath caught, and I pressed myself against the wall, the cold seeping through my shirt. The steps were uneven, hurried, like someone carrying something heavy. I leaned over the railing, peering into the gloom. A figure moved on the landing below, tall, broad-shouldered, a familiar silhouette in a tailored suit. Derek. He was hauling a cardboard box, the kind we used for client files, tucked under one arm. Something glinted in his other hand. A flash drive, maybe, or a phone. He didn't see me. His head bent as he muttered to himself, his voice low and clipped. "Not enough time, idiots." "Derek." I called before I could stop myself. My voice bounced off the walls, sharp and accusing. He froze, his head snapping up. For a split second, his face was all arrogance, eyes narrowed, mouth twisted into that smug grin. Then it shifted, a flicker of something else, panic, maybe, or guilt. "Nathan," he said, too loud, too casual. "What the hell are you doing here?" "Me." I took a step down, my hand tight on the railing. "What are you doing?" "Sneaking out with a box while the servers are frying." He laughed, a short, brittle sound that didn't match the tension in his shoulders. "Sneaking. I'm just grabbing some stuff. You're paranoid, man. Everything's fine." "Fine." I gestured upward, where the alarm's wail still drilled through the building. "Does that sound fine to you?" "What's in the box, Derek?" His grip on it tightened, his knuckles whitening. "Personal stuff. Look, I don't have time for this. I told you I'd explore options if you didn't step up. Maybe I'm done waiting. He turned to go, but I lunged down the steps, closing the gap. You don't get to walk away. Not now. What did you do to the servers? He spun back, his face inches from mine, the box wedged between us. Up close, I could smell the sweat on him, sharp and sour. You're out of your depth, Nathan. You think you can just waltz in here, play CEO, and everything falls into place? Your dad knew how to run this place. You don't. The jab hit hard, slicing through the guilt I'd been carrying since Dad's death. I shoved it down, focusing on the glint in his hand. A flash drive, definitely. What's that? I nodded at it. Something you're taking with you? Client data? Code. He stepped back, clutching the drive closer. None of your business. Back off. No, my voice was steady now, fueled by the anger bubbling up. You demanded a raise this morning, threatened to quit. Now the servers are crashing, and you're running off with a box and a drive? I'm not stupid, Derek. For a moment, he just stared at me, his eyes cold and unreadable. Then he smirked, but it was shaky, like he was trying to convince himself more than me. You want to play detective? Fine. Dig around. See what you find. Just don't come crying to me when it's too late. He shoved past me, the box knocking against my arm as he bolted down the stairs. I stumbled, catching myself on the railing, my heart pounding. I wanted to chase him, to rip that box open and see what he was hiding, but the alarm scream pulled me back. The servers, the company. I couldn't let it all burn. I turned and raced back up, my legs burning as I hit the 12th floor again. The hall was still empty, the red glow from the server room pulsing like a wound. I fumbled with the key, my hands shaking as I unlocked the door. The smoke was thicker now, a gray veil that stung my eyes and throat. The alarm was deafening, a physical force pressing against my skull. I staggered to the panel, squinting through the haze. The wires were a tangled mess, some charred, others sparking faintly. A screen flickered beside it, numbers scrolling too fast to read. Temperatures, maybe, or error codes. I didn't know enough to fix it, but I had to try something. I grabbed a fire extinguisher from a wall, my fingers clumsy on the nozzle, and aimed it at the smoking server. White foam sprayed out, coating the machine, but the sparks kept spitting, defiant. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I yanked it out, hoping for Ethan or Lydia. It was a text from an unknown number. Check the logs, that was it. No name, no context. I stared at it, my mind racing. Logs. Server logs? Access logs. Who sent this? I wiped sweat from my forehead, the extinguisher slipping in my grip. Derek's smirk flashed in my head, his words twisting with the text. See what you find. He'd done this, or he knew who had, and he was walking away with something that could sink us. The lights dimmed again, the room plunging into a stuttering half-darkness. I coughed, the smoke clawing at my lungs. I couldn't stay here, but I couldn't leave empty-handed. I needed proof, something to nail Derek, to save Carter Tech. The logs. If I could get to them, maybe I'd find a trace. I stumbled out of the server room, locking it behind me, and headed for my office. The alarm chased me, a relentless shadow. My desk was a mess, papers everywhere, the photo of Dad face down on the floor. I righted it, my throat tight, then booted up my laptop. The screen glowed to life, but the network was down, servers offline, just a spinning wheel mocking me. A noise cut through the chaos, a soft thud, like a door closing somewhere down the hall. I froze, my pulse hammering. Derek? Or someone else? The text burned in my mind. Check the logs. I needed help. Ethan, Lydia, anyone. But I was alone, and the danger was closing in. The hallway stretched before me, a tunnel of flickering lights and choking smoke. The alarm's wail a jagged edge slicing through my thoughts. I clutched my laptop under one arm, the photo of Dad tucked into my jacket, its corner digging into my chest like a reminder of what I couldn't lose. The thud I'd heard lingered in my mind, a soft, deliberate sound, too close to be random. Someone was here, and it wasn't just Derek slinking off with his box of secrets. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I moved toward the break room, my steps quick but cautious, the hardwood slick under my shoes. The air was cooler here, away from the server room's heat, but it carried a faint bitterness, burnt coffee, Maybe. Or something sharper. The breakroom door was ajar, a sliver of fluorescent light spilling into the hall. I paused, my hand hovering over the handle, every nerve screaming at me to turn back. But I couldn't. Not with Carter Tech teetering on the edge. Not with Dad's legacy slipping through my fingers. I pushed the door open, and the room came into focus, empty at first glance. The counters were cluttered with the usual mess. A coffee pot half full of sludge, a stack of paper cups, a microwave humming faintly despite no one being around. The air felt stale, heavy with the weight of a day interrupted. Then I saw her, Lydia, hunched over the table in the corner, her back to me. Her shoulders were tense, her dark hair spilling loose from its usual neat bun. She didn't turn, didn't even flinch, but the rapid scratch of her pen against a notepad told me she was alive, at least. Lydia. My voice cracked, raw from the smoke and the panic clawing at my throat. What the hell's going on? Where have you been? She stopped writing, her hand freezing mid-stroke. Slowly, she turned, and I saw her face, pale, eyes wide with something between fear and fury. Her lips pressed into a thin line, trembling slightly as she met my gaze. Nathan, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. You shouldn't be here. What? I stepped closer, the laptop slipping in my grip. What do you mean? The servers are frying. Derek's running off with God knows what, and you're sitting here like nothing's wrong. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the tile with a sound that made me wince. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. It's not nothing, she snapped, her usual calm fraying at the edges. It's Derek. I found something big. And now, she trailed off, glancing toward the door like she expected it to burst open. Found what? I set the laptop down, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. Lydia talked to me. I just saw him in the stairwell with a box and a flash drive. He's up to something. Did he do this to the servers? She hesitated, her eyes darting to the notepad in front of her. Then she slid it across the table toward me, her movements jerky, urgent. Look at this. I've been tracking his expense reports for weeks. Little things at first, overpriced lunches, vague consulting fees. I thought he was just sloppy, but it's more than that. Way more. I grabbed the notepad, my eyes scanning the scrawled numbers and dates. Rows of figures circled in red ink, with notes in her tight, precise handwriting. Asterisk unapproved vendor. Duplicate charges. Cash withdrawals. Asterisk my stomach twisted as I flipped the page. There were screenshots taped to the next sheet, blurry images of invoices, email threads, a bank transfer with a six-figure sum, and at the bottom, a name I didn't recognize, Silverline Consulting. What is this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. A side hustle. More than a hustle, Lydia said, stepping closer. Her breath was shallow, her fear palpable now. He's been siphoning money from Carter Tech. Thousands, Nathan. Maybe more. Silverline's a shell company. I checked. No website, no public records, just a P.O. box in Tacoma. He's been doing it right under our noses, during work hours, using company resources. I stared at the numbers, the proof staring back at me in black and red. Derek's arrogance, his demand for a raise, it wasn't just greed. It was a cover, a distraction while he bled the company dry. My hand shook, rage boiling up alongside the guilt I'd been choking on all day. How long? I asked, my voice tight. How long has he been doing this? Months at least, she said, wrapping her arms around herself like she was cold. I only caught it because he got careless, submitted the same invoice twice last week. I didn't want to believe it. I kept digging, hoping I was wrong. But then today, she swallowed hard, her eyes flicking to the door again. The servers. I think he's covering his tracks. The pieces clicked together, sharp and brutal. The red glow, the smoke, the chaos. It wasn't just sabotage. It was a purge. He's wiping evidence, I said, the realization hitting me like a fist. The flash drive. He's got data on it. Maybe backups, maybe more proof. And he's running. Lydia nodded, her fear hardening into something else. Resolve, maybe, or desperation. We can't let him get away with it. Your dad built this place. Derek doesn't get to burn it down. Her words cut deep, stirring the ache I'd carried since Dad's death. She was right. He trusted Derek, groomed him, and now that trust was a knife in our backs. I slammed the notepad down, my mind racing. We need to stop him. The logs, that text I got. If we can get into the system, maybe there's a record of what he accessed, what he took. Lydia's brow furrowed. Text? What text? I pulled out my phone, showing her the message. Check the logs. No idea who sent it. Ethan, maybe? Someone who knows what's happening. She shook her head, her frown deepening. Ethan's out sick today. I haven't heard from him, and no one else has access to. She stopped, her eyes widening. Unless Derek sent it. A taunt. He's cocky enough. The thought made my blood run cold. Derek, playing games while the company burned. Then we beat him at it, I said, grabbing the laptop. We get to the logs first. If the servers are still up, even partially, we can pull something. IP traces, file transfers, anything. Lydia hesitated, her gaze flicking to the window. Outside, the rain lashed harder, a gray curtain blurring the city. Nathan, it's not safe. If he's desperate enough to torch the servers, he might. A crash cut her off, a sharp, shattering sound from the hall. Glass, maybe, or metal. My heart lurched, and I spun toward the door, every muscle tensing. Lydia grabbed my arm, her grip tight, her nails digging into my sleeve. What was that? She whispered, her voice trembling. I don't know, I said, prying her hand loose. Stay here. Lock the door. No way, she shot back, her resolve snapping into place. I'm not hiding while you play hero. We're in this together. I didn't argue. There wasn't time. We stepped into the hall, the alarm still screaming, the lights stuttering overhead. The air was thicker now, laced with a faint metallic tang. At the far end, near the stairwell, a fire extinguisher lay on its side, foam pooling around it like spilled blood. The glass case that had held it was shattered, shards glinting in the flickering light. Someone's been here, I said, my voice low. Derek, or someone helping him, Lydia murmured, her eyes scanning the shadows. We need to move. Now. We hurried to my office, my pulse hammering in my ears. The door was still closed, but the lock felt loose when I turned the key, like it had been tampered with. Inside, the mess was worse, drawers yanked open, papers strewn across the floor. My laptop screen was dark, but a faint hum told me it was still alive. I booted it up, my fingers clumsy on the keys, while Lydia kept watch at the door. The network was spotty, the connection flickering like the lights. Come on, I muttered, willing it to load. A login screen blinked up, Dad's admin account. I typed the password I'd seen him use 100 times. Lake Wash 92. Access granted. I navigated to the server logs, my breath hitching as the data scrolled past. Timestamps, user IDs, file names. There, Derek's account, active 30 minutes ago. Downloads, dozens of them, tagged with encrypted file extensions I didn't recognize. And then, a command. System purge initiated. He's erasing everything, I said, my voice shaking with fury. But he didn't finish. The crash must have interrupted it. Lydia leaned over my shoulder, her breath warm against my neck. Can you stop it? Roll it back. I don't know, I admitted, my hands hovering over the keyboard. But we've got something. Proof he was here. Proof he took files. We can use this. A shadow flickered in the hall, quick and deliberate. Lydia gasped, stepping back. Nathan. The door slammed open, and there he was, Derek, his suit rumpled, his face flushed with something wild, unhinged. The box was gone, but the flash drive dangled from his hand, swinging like a pendulum. His grin was back, but it was brittle, cracking at the edges. Well, well, he said, his voice dripping with mockery. Look who's playing detective after all. My office felt like it was shrinking, the walls pressing in as Derek stood there, his silhouette framed by the flickering hallway light. The flash drive swung lazily from his fingers, a taunt in motion, while the alarm's relentless wail pulsed through the air like a second heartbeat. I couldn't tear my eyes off him, his grin, sharp and jagged, didn't match the sweat beading on his forehead or the wild glint in his stare. He was unraveling, and I could feel it. A crack in the arrogance he'd worn like armor all day. "You're too late, Nathan," he said, his voice low and mocking, but there was a tremor beneath it, a thread of panic he couldn't quite bury. "You and your little sidekick here. Cute, really. Thinking you can stop this." Lydia stiffened beside me, her breath catching, but she didn't back down. "We've got proof, Derek," she said, her tone steady despite the fear I'd seen in her eyes moments ago. "The logs. Your downloads. The purge command. It's over." His grin faltered, just for a heartbeat, before he forced it back into place. "Proof? You think a few screenshots and some gibberish on a screen mean anything? This isn't a courtroom, sweetheart. This is my game." I stepped forward, my fists clenched, the laptop screen glowing behind me with the damning evidence. "It's not a game when you're stealing from my father's company. Siphoning cash, sabotaging the servers. What's on that drive, Derek? The rest of the money trail? Names." He laughed, a brittle, hollow sound that echoed off the walls. "Oh, Nathan, you're so predictable. Always the good son, scrambling to save Daddy's legacy. You don't even know what you're up against." He dangled the flash drive higher, like bait, his eyes daring me to lunge for it. The room smelled of smoke and desperation, the faint metallic tang from the hall seeping in. My desk lamp flickered, casting jagged shadows across his face, turning his features into something feral. I could hear the rain outside, a steady lash against the windows, but inside, the air was thick, suffocating. Every detail sharpened, the scuff on his polished shoe, the crease in his rumpled suit, the way his knuckles whitened around that drive. He wasn't just running. He was scared. "Then tell me," I said, my voice low, controlled, even as my heart slammed against my ribs. "What am I up against? You've been playing this con for months, Silverline Consulting, fake invoices, cash grabs. Why tank the company now? What's the endgame?" Derek's eyes narrowed, his grin slipping into something colder, more dangerous. "You think this is about Carter Tech? You're so small-minded. This place was just a stepping stone, a means to an end. And you," he pointed the flash drive at me, his hand shaking slightly, "you were supposed to stay out of it. But no, you had to dig, didn't you?" Lydia moved closer to me, her shoulder brushing mine, a silent anchor. "He's lying," she whispered, her voice tight but firm. "He's stalling. He didn't expect us to find this much." I nodded, keeping my eyes on Derek. She was right. His bravado was cracking, his arrogance melting into something raw, frantic. I could see it in the way he shifted his weight, like a cornered animal sizing up an escape. "Stalling for what?" I asked, stepping closer, my shoes crunching over the scattered papers on the floor. "Someone coming to clean up your mess? Or are you just hoping the servers finish frying before we can save anything?" He flinched, barely, but I caught it. A twitch at the corner of his mouth, a flicker of doubt. "You don't get it," he snapped, his voice rising. "This isn't about me. It's bigger than me. You're the one who's screwed if you keep pushing." "Bigger than you?" I pressed, my mind racing. The logs, the money, the sabotage, it was adding up, but not to a picture I could fully grasp yet. "Who's pulling the strings, then? Silverline's a front. Who's front?" For a moment, he didn't answer. The alarm screeched on, the lights stuttering overhead, and the silence between us stretched taut, ready to snap. Then he smirked, but it was weaker now, a shadow of his usual swagger. "You'll find out soon enough. Too bad it'll be too late." Before I could respond, Lydia lunged, not at him, but at the desk, grabbing her notepad and thrusting it toward me. "The bank transfer," she said, her voice urgent. "Look at the routing number. It's not local. It's offshore." I snatched the pad, my eyes scanning the blurry screenshot she'd taped there. She was right, 9 digits, a string that didn't match any U.S. bank I knew. My stomach dropped. Offshore meant layers, meant someone or something, beyond Derek, beyond Carter Tech. "Who's this going to?" I demanded, shoving the pad toward him. "Who's paying you?" Derek's gaze darted to the notepad, and for the first time, the mask slipped completely. His face paled, his breath hitching audibly. "You don't want to know," he muttered, backing toward the door. "Trust me, Nathan, you don't." "Stop him," Lydia shouted, but I was already moving, my body reacting before my mind caught up. I grabbed his arm, yanking him back. The flash drive clattered to the floor, skittering under the desk. He swore, twisting in my grip, his elbows slamming into my chest. Pain flared, sharp and hot, but I held on, shoving him against the wall. "Tell me," I roared, my voice raw, echoing over the alarm. "Who's behind this? What's on that drive?" He struggled, his breaths coming in short, panicked gasps. "Let go, you idiot. You're dead if you don't." His eyes were wild now, pupils blown wide, and I realized he wasn't just fighting me. He was terrified. Lydia dove for the flash drive, her fingers closing around it as she scrambled back to her feet. "Got it," she cried, clutching it to her chest. "Nathan, we've got him." Derek went still, his body slumping against the wall, his head thudding back against the plaster. "You've got nothing," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You think that's the only copy? You think I'm the only one who knows?" The words hit me like ice water, chilling the rage burning through me. I loosened my grip, stepping back, my chest heaving. "What do you mean?" I asked, dread coiling in my gut. "Who else knows?" He laughed again, but it was a desperate, choking sound, nothing like the confidence he'd strutted in with hours ago. "You'll see. They'll come for it. For you. I was just the middleman." The lights flickered again, plunging us into darkness for a split second before snapping back on. In that brief void I heard it, a low rumble, not the rain, not the alarm, but something deeper, closer. The floor vibrated faintly beneath my feet, a tremor that made the papers on the floor shiver. Lydia's eyes met mine, wide and searching. "What was that?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, my voice barely audible over the chaos. I turned back to Derek, grabbing his collar. "Who's coming? Talk." But he just stared at me, his face slack, his arrogance gone. "You should have run," he said softly, almost pitying. "Like the text said." The text. Check the logs. My mind spun, the pieces slamming together. It wasn't Ethan, wasn't a taunt from Derek. Someone else had sent it, someone watching, waiting. The offshore account, the purge, Derek's panic. It wasn't just a scam. It was a setup, and we were still in the middle of it. A sharp crack split the air, not from the servers, but from the hall. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoed closer. Lydia grabbed my arm, her nails digging in. "Nathan, we need to go. Now." I released Derek, who slid down the wall, his head in his hands. The flash drive was in Lydia's grip, the notepad under my arm, but the truth felt heavier, darker than anything we'd uncovered. The footsteps grew louder, a steady march cutting through the alarm scream. Whoever was coming, they weren't here to help. "Back exit," I said, pulling Lydia toward the door. "Stairs. We can't stay here." She nodded, her resolve hardening despite the fear in her eyes. We bolted into the hall, the smoke thicker now, curling around us like fingers. The lights buzzed overhead, casting the world into a stuttering nightmare. Behind us, Derek's voice faded into a low mutter, lost in the chaos. Ahead, the stairwell loomed, a dark promise of escape, or a trap. The truth was unraveling, thread by thread, but it wasn't just Derek's secrets we were chasing now. It was something bigger, something that knew my name, and it was closing in. The stairwell swallowed us whole, a dim, echoing chute of concrete and steel that smelled of damp rot and fear. My hand gripped Lydia's wrist as we stumbled down the steps, the flashlight on my phone casting a thin, jittery beam ahead. The alarm's wail chased us, muffled now but relentless, a banshee screaming through the walls. Smoke curled down from above, a gray tendril that stung my eyes and throat, but it was the sound behind us, the heavy, deliberate thud of footsteps, that drove my heart into a frantic gallop. They weren't Derek's. He'd crumpled back there, a broken shell of the man who'd strutted into my office that morning. Whoever was coming now moved with purpose, a hunter's stride cutting through the chaos. "Faster!" I rasped, my voice raw as I pulled Lydia around a landing. Her breath came in sharp gasps beside me, but she kept pace, her fingers clutching the flash drive like a lifeline. The notepad was still tucked under my arm, its edges digging into my ribs with every step. Proof. Evidence. It felt flimsy now, a paper shield against whatever loomed in the shadows above. The stairwell vibrated again, a low rumble that shook the railing under my palm. Dust sifted down from the ceiling, catching in the flashlight's beam like ash. "What is that?" Lydia whispered, her voice trembling but edged with steel. She wasn't breaking, not yet. "I don't know," I said, my mind racing. "Elevator? Structural damage? We can't stop to find out." The truth gnawed at me. It wasn't just the building falling apart. It was something, or someone, tearing it down. Derek's words echoed in my skull. Asterisk, they'll come for it. For you. Asterisk, I thought he was bluffing. A last jab to save his skin. Now, with every creak and groan of the tower, doubt clawed deeper. We hit the 8th floor, and I shoved the door open, spilling us into a hallway thick with shadows. The lights here were dead, not even flickering, just cold, black sockets staring down from the ceiling. The air was stale, heavy with the metallic tang I'd caught earlier, sharper now, like blood or burnt wiring. My beam swept the corridor, catching on overturned chairs, a shattered coffee mug, papers strewn across the floor like fallen leaves. The office had been abandoned mid-breath, a snapshot of panic frozen in time. "Where's the back exit?" Lydia asked, her voice tight as she pressed closer to me. Her warmth was the only thing tethering me to the moment, keeping the fear from swallowing me whole. "End of the hall," I said, nodding toward the far side where a faint green glow marked the emergency exit. "Through the storage room. We're almost there." But the words felt hollow. Almost wasn't enough. Not with those footsteps still echoing down the stairwell, closer now. A steady drumbeat of pursuit. We moved fast, dodging debris, my light bouncing off the walls. The storage room door loomed ahead, its chipped paint and dented metal a promise of freedom. I grabbed the handle, twisting hard. Locked. My stomach lurched, a cold sweat breaking across my skin. "No, no, no," I muttered, fumbling in my pocket for the key I'd taken from Lydia's desk. My fingers shook, slick with panic, as I jammed it into the lock. "Hurry," Lydia urged, her eyes darting back to the stairwell door we'd come through. It rattled faintly, a tremor that could have been the building, or something worse. The lock clicked, and I shoved the door open, pulling Lydia inside. The storage room was a maze of shadows, stacked boxes, filing cabinets, a tangle of old cables spilling across the floor like snakes. The exit sign glowed above a steel door on the far wall, its green light a beacon through the gloom. I swung my flashlight around, searching for threats, my breath hitching at every flicker of movement. Nothing. Just us, the dust, and the suffocating silence. Then the stairwell door behind us slammed open, the sound of gunshot in the quiet. I spun, my light catching a figure in the doorway, tall, broad, clad in black, face obscured by a hood. No features, just a void where a person should have been. My blood turned to ice, my legs locking beneath me. Lydia's gasp was as sharp as beside me, her hand tightening on the flash drive. "Run," I barked, shoving her toward the exit. She stumbled but caught herself, sprinting for the door as I backed after her, my light fixed on the figure. It didn't move, not yet, just stood there, a silent threat filling the doorway. My chest burned, every instinct screaming at me to flee, but I couldn't look away. Who was this? Derek's the offshore account's muscle? My mind churned, grasping for answers it didn't have. Lydia reached the exit, slamming her shoulder into the bar. It didn't budge. "It's stuck," she cried, her voice cracking as she pounded on it. "Nathan, help." I tore my eyes from the figure and ran to her, dropping the notepad to throw my weight against the door. It groaned, metal scraping metal, but held fast. My flashlight clattered to the floor, its beam spinning wildly across the room. In its light, I saw the figure step forward, slow and deliberate, boots crunching over the debris. A gloved hand emerged from a sleeve, holding something, a gun, matte black and gleaming. "Get down," I yelled, yanking Lydia to the floor behind a filing cabinet. My heart hammered, a frantic rhythm drowning out the alarm's distant wail. The air shifted, a faint whistle cutting through the silence, and a thud vibrated the cabinet. Too close. A silencer. They weren't just here to scare us. Lydia's breath was hot against my neck, her body trembling against mine. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the blood rushing in my ears. The flash drive dug into her palm, a tiny weight that felt like it could crush us both. I peered around the cabinet, my pulse a jackhammer. The figure was closer now, halfway across the room, moving with a predator's grace. My flashlight lay on its side, its beam catching the edge of a box, flammable, the label read. An idea sparked, desperate and reckless. "The cables," I muttered, nodding toward the tangle on the floor. "We can slow them down." Lydia's eyes widened, but she nodded, her fear hardening into resolve. "Cover me," she said, crawling toward the cables. I grabbed the flashlight, swinging it up to blind the figure, my hand shaking as I aimed. The light hit the hood, and for a split second, I thought I saw eyes, cold, unblinking, before it raised an arm to shield them. Lydia reached the cables, yanking them free and dragging them toward the boxes. I scrambled after her, grabbing a lighter from my pocket, Dad's old Zippo, a keepsake I'd carried since the funeral. My thumb flicked the wheel, sparking a flame that danced in the dark. "This better work," I muttered, tossing it onto the cables. The fire caught fast, licking up the wires and spreading to the boxes with a hungry crackle. Smoke billowed, thick and black, filling the room as the figure faltered, retreating a step. "Go," I shouted, hauling Lydia back to the exit. We slammed into it together, the heat at our backs, and this time it gave, a rusted bolt snapping free. Cold, wet air rushed in, the rain a roaring curtain beyond. We stumbled into the alley, the door banging shut behind us. The fire's glow pulsed through the cracks, a barrier between us and the figure for now. My lungs burned, my legs shaking as I pulled Lydia against the wall, the rain soaking us through in seconds. Her face was streaked with soot, her eyes wide but fierce. "We're alive," she said, half laughing, half sobbing, the flash drive still clutched in her hand. "Barely," I said, my voice hoarse. I glanced back at the door, expecting it to burst open, but it held. The rumble came again, louder now, shaking the ground beneath us. Not the building. Something else, tires, maybe, or an engine. Headlights flashed at the alley's end, twin beams cutting through the downpour. "Friend or foe?" Lydia asked, her grip tightening on my arm. "No idea," I said, my stomach twisting. Derek's panicked, the offshore account, the figure with the gun. It was all converging, a noose tightening around us. The headlights grew brighter, the roar closer, and I realized we weren't just running from the building anymore. We were running from something that knew exactly where to find us. The rain pounded down a cold, relentless sheet that plastered my hair to my forehead and blurred the world into a gray smear. The alley was narrow, its brick walls slick and glistening, closing us in like a trap. The headlights at the far end grew brighter, twin spears of light slicing through the downpour, and the roar of an engine vibrated in my chest, drowning out the fading crackle of the fire we'd left behind. Lydia pressed against me, her shoulder digging into mine, her breath a ragged cloud in the frigid air. The flash drive was still in her hand, its edges cutting into her palm, a tiny shard of hope, or damnation, we couldn't let go of. "Friend or foe?" she'd asked, and I still didn't have an answer. My gut churned, every instinct screaming at me to move, to run, but my legs felt rooted, heavy with the weight of everything we'd uncovered. Derek's collapse, the figure with the gun, the offshore account. It wasn't just a scam anymore. It was a noose, and I could feel it tightening around my neck. The headlights swelled, the vehicle, a black SUV, its grille gleaming like teeth, barreling closer. Tires squealed against wet pavement, kicking up sprays of water that glittered in the beams. "Nathan!" Lydia's voice cut through the haze, sharp and urgent. She yanked at my arm, pulling me toward a dumpster hunched against the wall. "We can't just stand here." She was right. Standing still was death. I stumbled after her, my shoes slipping on the slick ground, my heart a frantic drumbeat in my ears. We ducked behind the dumpster, its rusted metal cold against my back, the stench of rotting garbage mixing with the rain's metallic tang. The SUV screeched to a stop, its lights bathing the alley in a harsh white glow. Doors slammed, and boots hit the pavement. 2 pairs, maybe 3. Voices murmured, low and clipped, swallowed by the storm. I peered around the edge, my breath shallow, my pulse hammering so hard it hurt. 2 figures emerged from the glare, silhouettes in long coats, moving with the same deliberate grace as the gunman in the storage room. One carried a flashlight, its beam sweeping the alley, slicing through the rain like a blade. The other held something heavier, a rifle, its barrel catching the light. My stomach dropped, a cold wave of dread washing over me. These weren't cops, weren't security. They were hunters, and we were the prey. Lydia's hand found mine, her fingers trembling but firm. "They're here for the drive," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Or us." "Both," I muttered, my mind racing. Derek's warning replayed in my head. Asterisk, they'll come for it. For you. Asterisk, he'd known this was coming. Knew and still ran, leaving us to face it. The logs, the flash drive, the money. It was all tied to something bigger, something that didn't hesitate to send armed shadows after us. I squeezed Lydia's hand, my resolve hardening despite the fear clawing at my chest. "We can't let them have it. Not after everything." Her eyes met mine, wide and searching, but there was a spark there, fear evolving into something fiercer, something unbreakable. "Then we fight," she said, her voice steady now. "Or we run smart." The flashlight beam swung closer, grazing the dumpster's edge. I pulled her lower, my back scraping against the rough metal, my mind scrambling for a plan. The alley was a dead end behind us, just a brick wall slick with moss and rain. Forward meant facing them, 2, maybe 3, armed and closing in. The fire in the storage room might have slowed the first pursuer, but these were fresh, unrelenting. My eyes darted to the ground, catching on a glint in the muck, a broken bottle, its jagged neck shimmering in the wet. I grabbed it, the glass biting into my palm, a sharp sting I barely felt through the adrenaline. "If they get too close," I whispered, "we use this. Buy time." Lydia nodded, her jaw tight, but her gaze flicked to the flash drive. "If we lose this, it's over. Everything your dad built." "I know." I cut her off, my voice rough. "But if we're dead, it's over anyway." The words hung between us, heavy and final, a truth I hadn't wanted to face until now. This wasn't just about Carter Tech anymore. It was about survival, about clawing our way out of a nightmare I'd stumbled into the moment I took Dad's chair. The beam hit the dumpster, flooding the space around us with light. I held my breath, the bottle trembling in my grip. A shadow loomed, boots crunching closer, water pooling around them in shallow ripples. "Check behind it." A voice barked, deep, authoritative, with an edge I didn't recognize. Not Derek's. Someone new, someone in charge. The second figure moved in, the rifle's barrel dipping as they rounded the dumpster. Time slowed, every detail sharpening, the rain streaking down their coat, the faint gleam of a comms device in their ear, the way their gloved hand tightened on the weapon. My muscles coiled, ready to strike, but Lydia moved first, fast, silent, a blur of motion as she grabbed a loose brick from the ground and hurled it past them, toward the SUV. It clattered against the hood, a sharp crack that echoed through the alley. The figure spun, the rifle snapping up, and I seized the moment. I lunged, driving the broken bottle upward, aiming for their arm. Glass met flesh, a muffled grunt escaping as the rifle clattered to the ground. Blood mixed with rain, dark and slick, but I didn't stop. I shoved them back, my shoulder slamming into their chest, sending them sprawling into the muck. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Lydia's arm. We bolted past the fallen figure, the flashlight beam swinging wildly as the other one shouted something. A curse, a command, I couldn't tell. The SUV's engine roared again, tire spinning as it lurched forward, but we were already moving, weaving through the alley's clutter, trash bags, a rusted bike frame, anything to slow them down. My lungs burned, the rain blinding me as we hit the street beyond. Cars honked, their headlights smearing into streaks of yellow and red, but I didn't stop. didn't dare look back. Lydia kept pace, her hand still clutching the drive, her resolve a mirror to the determination surging through me. Frustration, months of guilt, of failing dad, had shifted, hardened into something else, a will to fight, to protect what he'd left me. We ducked into a side street, narrower still, the buildings leaning in like silent witnesses. My shoes splashed through puddles, my chest heaving as I scanned for cover. A doorway, recessed, shadowed, caught my eye. I pulled Lydia into it, pressing us against the damp wood, the overhang shielding us from the worst of the rain. My breath came in gasps, my ears straining for the sound of pursuit. The SUV's growl faded, replaced by the steady drum of water on concrete. But I knew they weren't gone. Not yet. Lydia leaned against me, her soaked hair clinging to her face, her eyes fierce despite the exhaustion etching lines around them. "We can't keep running," she said, her voice low but firm. "They'll find us. We need to end this." I nodded, my mind churning. She was right. Running was just delaying the inevitable. The flash drive burned in her hand, a key to everything. Derek's scheme, the offshore account, the people hunting us. "The logs," I said, the idea crystallizing. "If we can get somewhere safe, upload them, expose it all, they'll have no reason to come after us. It'll be too late." "Where?" she asked, wiping rain from her eyes. "The office is a war zone. My place, yours. They'll know to look there." "Ethan's," I said, the name hitting me like a lifeline. "He's got the setup servers, backups. If he's really sick, he won't be there. We can use his system." Ethan, our IT guy, lived across town in a cluttered apartment full of tech. Our best shot at turning the tables. Lydia hesitated, then nodded. "Okay, but we need to move fast. They're not stupid. They'll figure it out." A distant screech of tires cut through the rain, the SUV's lights flashing at the street's end. My heart lurched, but I forced it down, focusing on the next step. "Bus," I said, spotting a stop half a block away, its shelter glowing faintly through the storm. "We blend in. Lose them." We slipped out of the doorway, keeping low, the rain a curtain between us and the hunters. The bus rolled up as we reached the stop, its doors hissing open, and we climbed aboard, dripping and breathless. Faces turned, curious, annoyed, but I ignored them, pulling Lydia to the back, my eyes locked on the windows. The SUV prowled past, slow and searching, but the bus lurched forward, carrying us away. My hand found hers again, the flash drive a hard knot between our palms. Fear still gnawed at me, raw and jagged, but it was laced with something new, courage, desperate and defiant. We were alive, we had proof, and we weren't done yet. The high-rise loomed in my mind, Dad's office a smoldering ruin, but his legacy wasn't lost, not while I could still fight. The bus rumbled through the city, the rain a relentless shroud, and I knew this wasn't the end. It was a choice, run forever, or face them head-on. I glanced at Lydia, her resolve mirroring mine, and I made it we'd fight. For Dad. For us. The bus rattled through the city, its engine a low growl beneath the steady drum of rain against the windows. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wet clothes and stale coffee, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the faces of strangers, tired commuters, oblivious to the storm raging in my chest. I sat at the back. Lydia pressed close beside me, our soaked clothes clinging to our skin, the flash drive a cold, sharp weight between our entwined hands. My eyes stayed locked on the window, scanning the blurred streets for any sign of the black SUV. Its headlights burned into my memory like a predator's stare. Every screech of tires, every flash of light, made my pulse spike. But the bus kept moving, carrying us deeper into the city's labyrinth, away from the chaos we'd left behind. Lydia's breath was steady now, slower than it had been in the alley, but her grip on my hand was iron-tight, her resolve a palpable force beside me. "We're okay," she whispered, more to herself than to me, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. "For now. For now," I echoed, my throat raw, my mind churning. The high-rise loomed in my thoughts, a smoldering ruin of smoke and shattered glass. But it wasn't just the building I saw. It was Dad's legacy, teetering on the edge of oblivion. Derek's betrayal, the offshore account, the armed shadows hunting us. It was all connected, a web I'd only begun to untangle. The flash drive in Lydia's hand was our only weapon, our only chance to turn the hunter into the hunted. But it wasn't enough to run, not anymore. We had to strike back, to expose the truth before it buried us. The bus lurched to a stop, the doors hissing open, and I glanced out at the rain-slicked street. Ethan's neighborhood, gritty, industrial, a maze of old warehouses and narrow alleys. "This is us," I said, standing, my legs unsteady but my resolve firm. Lydia nodded, slipping the flash drive into her pocket, her eyes meeting mine with a fierce determination that mirrored my own. Fear still lingered in her gaze, but it had shifted, hardened into something unbreakable, a resolve born of survival. We stepped off the bus, the rain hitting us like a slap, cold and relentless. The street was deserted, the warehouses looming like silent sentinels, their windows dark and unseeing. I pulled my jacket tighter, the photo of Dad inside its lining a sharp reminder of why I couldn't falter now. "Ethan's place is 2 blocks down," I said, keeping my voice low, my eyes scanning the shadows. "We move fast, stay off the main road." Lydia nodded, falling into step beside me, her shoes splashing through puddles that reflected the faint glow of streetlights. The air was heavy, charged with the electric tang of ozone, and every sound, the drip of water from a gutter, the distant wail of a siren, set my nerves on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes tracking us through the storm. Derek's warning echoed in my skull. Asterisk, they'll come for it. For you. Asterisk, whoever they weren't done. Not by a long shot. Ethan's building came into view, a squat, brick structure wedged between 2 larger warehouses, its windows glowing faintly through the rain. The front door was locked, a keypad blinking beside it, but I remembered the code. Ethan had given it to me months ago, half joking that I'd need it if I ever wanted to hide from the corporate overlords. My fingers trembled as I punched it in, the cold numbing my skin, but the lock clicked, and the door swung open with a groan. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the smell of old pizza and electronics, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The hallway was dim, lit by a single flickering bulb, and I could hear the faint hum of servers from Ethan's apartment, a sound that felt like salvation. "Second floor," I said, leading the way, my hand on the railing slick with rain and sweat. Lydia followed, her steps quick but cautious, her hand hovering near her pocket, where the flash drive hid. "What if they're already here?" she asked, her voice low, her eyes darting to the shadows at the hall's end. "They found us in the alley fast." "Then we fight," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my gut. "But Ethan's system is our best shot. If we can upload the logs, the files, everything, it's over. They'll have no reason to chase us if it's all public." She nodded, but her jaw tightened, her fear still there, simmering beneath the surface. "And if it's not enough? If they don't care?" I didn't answer, couldn't. The possibility that this wasn't just about money, about evidence, but something darker, something personal, hung between us like a shadow. I pushed it down, focusing on the next step, the next breath. We reached Ethan's door, its chipped paint and faded number a lifeline in the storm. I knocked, sharp and urgent, but there was no answer, just the steady hum of machinery inside. "He's not here," Lydia said, her voice tight. "You said he was sick." "Yeah," I said, fishing in my pocket for the spare key Ethan had given me, a relic of late-night troubleshooting sessions. "Which means we've got the place to ourselves." The lock turned, and I pushed the door open, the warmth of the apartment washing over us like a balm. Inside, it was chaos, Ethan's usual mess, but amplified. Empty energy drink cans littered the coffee table, wire spilled from open server racks, and a half-eaten sandwich sat forgotten on a chair. The main room was dominated by a wall of monitors, their screens glowing with scrolling data, a digital heartbeat that felt alive, defiant. I locked the door behind us, sliding the deadbolt into place, my chest loosening slightly at the sound. Safe for now. Lydia crossed to the monitors, her eyes scanning the setup, her resolve sharpening. "This is it," she said, pulling the flash drive from her pocket. If we can decrypt the files, upload them, news sites, regulators, anyone who'll listen, we end this. I nodded, joining her at the desk, my hand steadying as I powered on the main system. The screens flared to life, a login prompt blinking up. Ethan's domain, his fortress. I typed in his password, one I'd seen him use a dozen times. Bite me 77. Access granted. Okay, I said, my voice firm, my frustration shifting into determination. Let's see what Derek was hiding. Lydia plugged in the flash drive, and the system word, a file explorer popping up. Folders, dozens of them, with cryptic names. Asterisk Project Silver, asterisk transfer logs, Client X. My heart pounded as I opened the first, my eyes scanning the contents. Spreadsheets of transactions, emails, bank records. The offshore account was there, tied to a name I didn't recognize. Vanguard Holdings, not Silverline Consulting, but something bigger, something that made my stomach twist. Look at this, Lydia said, pointing to an email thread. The subject line was blank, but the body was chilling. Asterisk Phase 2 initiated. Asset disposal confirmed. Carter Tech termination scheduled. Asterisk the sender's address was encrypted, but the recipient was clear, Derek Mason. Termination, I whispered, the word heavy final. They weren't just stealing. They were planning to destroy the company, wipe it out. Lydia's face paled, but her jaw set, her fear evolving into resolve. Then we stopped them, she said, her voice fierce. We upload everything now. I nodded, my fingers flying over the keyboard, copying files to a secure cloud server Ethan had set up for backups. My mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. Derek had been a pawn, a greedy, arrogant pawn, but a pawn nonetheless. Vanguard Holdings, whoever they were, had used him to bleed Carter Tech dry, to destabilize it, to make it ripe for what? A takeover, a cover-up? The rumble in the high-rise, the armed figures, it was all part of a plan. A machine grinding toward an end I couldn't see yet. The upload bar crept forward, agonizingly slow, the percentage ticking up like a countdown to salvation or disaster. Lydia kept watch at the window, her silhouette tense against the rain-streaked glass. Anything? I asked, my voice tight. Nothing yet, she said, but her tone was strained, her eyes locked on the street below. But they'll come. They always do. The upload hit 50%, then 60%, the files spilling into the cloud. Evidence, truth, a weapon. I opened a browser, my hands trembling as I typed out a message to a local news outlet, attaching the link to the cloud drive. Asterisk Carter Tech Solutions, targeted in corporate conspiracy. Fraud, sabotage, and attempted murder. Asterisk the words felt surreal, a headline from someone else's life. But they were mine, ours. I hit send, my breath catching as the confirmation popped up. It was out there now, unstoppable. A sharp crack split the air, not thunder, but glass. Lydia spun from the window, her face white. They're here, she said, her voice low, urgent. Nathan, we need to go. I glanced at the screen, 85%. Almost there, I said, my heart pounding, my determination afire in my chest. We finish this. The door rattled, a heavy thud vibrating through the wood. Lydia grabbed a metal pipe from the clutter on Ethan's desk, her grip steady despite the fear in her eyes. I'll hold them off, she said, her voice fierce. You get it done. I nodded, my throat tight, as another thud shook the door. The deadbolt held, but not for long. The upload hit 95%, then 98%, the bar inching forward as the door groaned under a third blow. My eyes flicked to the pipe in Lydia's hand, to the resolve in her stance, and I realized how far we'd come. Fear to fight, panic to purpose. She wasn't just my assistant anymore. She was my partner, my anchor in this storm. The upload completed, a green check mark flashing on the screen. It's done, I said, yanking the flash drive free and shoving it into my pocket. Let's go. The door splintered, a gloved hand bursting through, and Lydia swung the pipe, a sharp clang echoing as it hit metal. Back exit, she shouted, pointing to a narrow door behind the server racks. I grabbed her arm, pulling her with me as the front door buckled, boots pounding into the room. We bolted through the back, the door slamming shut behind us, a flimsy lock our only defense. The stairwell was dark, the air damp and cold, but we didn't stop, didn't dare. My shoes slipped on the steps, my chest burning, but Lydia's hand in mine kept me moving. We hit the ground floor, bursting into an alley slick with rain, the night swallowing us whole. Headlights flashed ahead, the SUV's growl cutting through the storm, but this time, blue lights joined it, sirens, sharp and piercing, a sound that felt like salvation. Police cars screeched to a stop, officers spilling out, guns drawn. "Freeze!" one shouted, his voice a command that stopped me cold. I raised my hands, Lydia beside me, her pipe clattering to the ground. The SUV's doors opened, figures stepping out, but they froze too, caught in the police's glare. My message, someone had seen it, acted on it, faster than I dared hope. The truth was out, a floodlight in the dark, and the hunters were now the hunted. Hours later, we sat in a precinct room, the air thick with the smell of burnt coffee and disinfectant. Blankets draped over our shoulders, our clothes still damp, but the weight on my chest had lifted, replaced by a weary relief. Across from us, a detective, gray-haired, sharp-eyed, flipped through a tablet, the files from the cloud drive glowing on the screen. "Vanguard Holdings," he said, his voice gruff. "Big fish. Corporate espionage, money laundering, the works. You two kicked over a hell of a hornet's nest." "Is it enough?" Lydia asked, her voice steady, her fear gone, replaced by a quiet strength. "To stop them?" The detective nodded, his expression grim, but satisfied. "More than enough. We've got Derek in custody, singing like a canary, trying to save his own skin. And those goons in the alley? Hired muscle, tied to Vanguard. With your evidence, we'll nail them all." I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, my eyes drifting to the photo of Dad on the table, rescued from my jacket. Guilt still gnawed at me, a dull ache, but it was different now. Tempered by action, by the fight I'd waged to save what he'd built. "What about Carter-Tech?" I asked, my voice rough. "Can it survive?" The detective shrugged, but there was a flicker of respect in his gaze. "That's up to you, kid. But you've got a hell of a story to tell. Use it." Lydia's hand found mine under the table, her touch warm, grounding. "We will," she said, her eyes meeting mine, her resolve a mirror to my own. "We'll rebuild. Together." Days later, I stood in the ruins of the high-rise, the air still sharp with the smell of smoke and ash. The server room was a charred skeleton, the office a maze of shattered glass and overturned furniture. But it wasn't the end. It was a beginning. The legal action against Derek was underway, Vanguard Holdings under investigation, and Carter-Tech's future, though uncertain, was ours to shape. Lydia stood beside me, her clipboard in hand, her eyes scanning the wreckage with a quiet determination. "First step," she said, her voice firm. "New security protocols. No more directs." I nodded, a faint smile tugging at my lips, the first in days. "And a new server room. State of the art. Dad would have loved that." She smiled back, her fear gone, replaced by a resolve that felt like home. "He'd be proud of you, Nathan. I know I am." I looked at her, then at the city skyline beyond, the rain finally gone, the sun breaking through the clouds in sharp, golden shards. Frustration had shifted to determination, guilt to purpose, and fear to a new alertness, a vigilance I'd carry forward, a lesson hard won. Carter-Tech would rise again, not just as Dad's legacy, but as mine, ours. And as I stepped into the light, Lydia at my side, I felt it, release, relief, and the promise of a new life, built on the ashes of the old.